Vanakkam. Hello friends. In the search for our roots, we started at the very beginning with the out of Africa theory of how the Homo sapiens came into the Indian subcontinent and how the regions that form the Tamil country today have been populated continuously for over 100,000 years thanks to the spectacular discovery of Robert Bruce Foote of innumerable Paleolithic tools in the Athirampakam area in Chengalpattu, followed by excavations in the Payyamballi area and Bargur areas, all of which led traces of evolution of human civilizations or rather human habitations in these areas. Then we went on to see how the caveman slowly started to form his culture, his language, and his religion. And I'm leaving links of the relevant episodes here for your easy reference. And finally, around 10,000 BCE, which is the time of the Neolithic or New Stone Age, human beings settled into agrarian populations, the earliest traces here being in 7000 BCE at Mehergar, which is an outpost of the Indus Valley civilization itself. The as yet undeciphered script, leaving a lot of ambiguity, but scholars such as Henry Heras, the great historian, to the recent times Finnish scholar Asko Parpola, all claiming that the Dravidian civilization is the best fit for the IVC itself. We spent the next few episodes exploring the connect between the Indus Valley civilization and our Tamil civilization. Starting from the genetic link, remember 4,500-year-old DNA of a woman found at Rakhigarhi in Haryana, an IVC outpost identified as belonging to the ASI population, ancient South Indian population. And in terms of linguistics, hundreds of Tamil place names scattered all over the Indus regions till date. And the cultural connect in terms of very many similarities such as the usage of pottery, and most importantly the religious connect where the worship of the mother goddess, the worship of the Muruga deity, and from there the crocodile, the Varuna Vidangar Linga and Linga Shiva, leading us on to a culmination in exploring the cosmic connect of Lord Nadaraja. Well, I took a tangent which was way out of the chronological timeline. So going back again in the timeline, with its as yet undeciphered script, the Indus Valley civilization cannot be claimed to be of Dravidian origin. And then again, this hypothesis supposed that with the decline of the Harappan civilization itself, starting from the first half of the second millennium BCE, populations should have migrated to the south and the east of the subcontinent, and those of them who came south settled in these regions and evolved into the Tamil civilization. Now, this did not go well with some scholars who, thanks to the Tamil psyche and the thinking that Tamil people are autochthonous to this region, Kal thondri man thondra kalatte vaalodu mun thondriya mootha kudi. So, that being the thinking, historians also claimed that way back the entire Indian subcontinent was scattered with Dravidian populations. The noted historian P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar, in his monumental work published in the year 1929, The History of Tamils from the earliest time up to 600 AD, claims people speaking dialects allied to Tamil once inhabited the whole of India. And the international scholars such as H.G. Wells also supported this notion. In his outline of history, about which we saw in a previous episode, published in the year 1920, that was before the Indus Valley civilization was announced to the world, in a book where histories of all around the world, all the civilizations are covered and pages of it are dedicated to Sumerian, Egyptian and Chinese, thanks to all of them having a written history from as way back as 3000 BCE. Before the discovery of the IVC itself, there was a huge gap, as if India was just a blip in the world history, And H.G. Wells dedicates just one para to tracing the prehistory of India, and here he writes, and I quote, "The Dravidian people in the Ganges Valley developed upon parallel lines to the Sumerians and Egyptians, but it is doubtful if they ever got to so high a stage of social development. They have left few monuments and never achieved any form of writing." Now he goes on to add, "Somewhere about the time of Hammurabi or later, a branch of Aryan speaking people who then occupied North Persia and Afghanistan pushed down the northwest until they prevailed over all the darker populations of North India and spread their rule or influence over the whole peninsula." While the Aryan invasion theory has since been debunked, it is agreed that the Aryans were a nomadic pastoral people who came in from the north and slowly mingled and spread to the whole of the subcontinent with the local populations from around the first half of the second millennium BCE, almost coinciding or overlapping with the starting of the decline of the Harappan civilization itself. And here H.G. Wells makes a mention that somewhere around the time of Hammurabi. Now Hammurabi was a Babylonian king who was sixth in line of the first Babylonian dynasty, who ruled between 1792 and 1750 and gave the very famous code of law known as the Code of Hammurabi. How do we know all this? All of this has been recorded in the cuneiform tablets, clay tablets, which carried the Sumerian script, developed as early as 3200 BCE, first to record the Sumerian language and then to record many dialects around that Mediterranean region up to the time of King Xerxes of Persia of 2nd century AD. So since this cuneiform script had been kept in continuous usage, people were able to read the Sumerian clay tablets from 3000 BCE, while the same does not hold good for the Indus Valley script itself. Now from here, in order to recreate or understand our own history, we have to depend on proto-history. Now prehistory being a time before written records were available, proto-history refers to a time period between prehistory and written history wherein the existence of a culture is recorded in the written histories of other cultures. Thus, if you take Sumeria for instance, in the capital of Ur, the moon temple that belonged to 3000 BCE used extensively the teak wood, and this teak wood we saw in a previous episode is typical to these regions of peninsular India and Burma, so much so that the very name teak in many languages has its roots in Tamil Tek, and the littoral region or the naval region from where our ancestors should have built boats again made out of teak, since teak was a water resistant wood, and navigated the seas all the way to Sumeria. It is a well established fact that ancient Tamilians had trade links with the Sumerians and the Egyptians, and the pearls from the Pandya country were in high demand in all those regions. Thirai Kadalodi, Thiraviyam Thedu was entrenched in the Tamil psyche. Then again, if we are to continue with proto-history, some of the earliest records of Tamil words are found in the Hebrew Bible belonging to King Solomon. King Solomon's reign is conventionally dated between 970 and 931 BCE, and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible of his period, carries a passage that shows the materials that were imported from a far off mystical land known as Ophir. The great Tamil scholar and researcher Manonmaniyam Sundaram Pillai has established Ophir as Uvari, a port along the eastern coast of Tamil country, and a few words that found their way into the Hebrew Bible, such as Tuhi, Tukim, which later meant parrot, was taken from the root Tuhi or Tohe, wherein King Solomon imported peacock, and the peacock feather is known as Tohe in Tamil. Again, Ahalim, that is eagle wood, the Hebrew word is directly taken from the Tamil word ahil, where this aromatic tree species again is a native of these regions. In his book, The Biography of Tamil, David Schulman, a professor in the University of Jerusalem, shows many such instances, as for example, the Hebrew word for palace, which is Armon, as coming from the Tamil word Aranmane, which means even in those days, these regions must have had well developed dynasties ruling out of palaces. And he points out similarly the root word in Tamil for unhusked rice, which is arisi, being the root word for rice in English, for ores in Hebrew, and horizon in Greece. And he mentions, and I quote, "It is in any case clear that trade relations between South India, the Persian Gulf, and the Levant, going back to at least the middle of the first millennium BCE, brought Dravidian names for exotic products westward centuries before Tamil becomes present in the historical record as a language of inscription." Again, in his outline of history, where H.G. Wells has catalogued the different language groups of the world, such as Semitic, Hamitic, Ural, Altic, and Chinese, he goes to identify two language groups that he is not able to classify under any of these major languages, one being the languages spoken in Polynesian islands in the far off Pacific Ocean, and the other being Dravidian in South India. So the word Dravidian itself, maybe he picked up from Bishop Robert Caldwell's A Comparative Grammar of Dravidian or South Indian Family of Languages, published way back in 1856, about which we have already seen. Dravida, a very old word, is of Sanskrit origin, where Dra means to run away or to move out of, Vid meaning a land. And Dravida, the term with its racial, linguistic, and regional connotation, is found embedded in very ancient Sanskrit classics of Parachara, Varakamikira, and others, including the Manusmriti, where Panchadravida is a term used to denote the South Indian regions, and is also found in a few places in the Mahabharata, where Dravida is used to refer to a far off Kshatriya kingdom in the southern part of peninsular India. Now, Mahabharata itself, though the authorship is traditionally assigned to the Saint Vyasa, and scholars, including the noted archaeologist B.B. Lal, have been trying to unravel its historical significance, the bulk of the text was compiled during the Gupta era, somewhere around 4th century BCE. So, while Caldwell rediscovered the word and used it to describe the languages of a people, and went on to do extensive research to establish that the oldest and most ancient and mature of the language tree that included as its southern branches Kannada, Telugu, and Malayalam, and had a pan-India presence, with its furthest branch, the Brahui language, being spoken in the Sindh province and Afghanistan. Caldwell established that Tamil indeed was the oldest of this family tree and had the capacity to function independently without Sanskrit loanwords. Even at that stage, he claimed that by removing all Sanskrit words, you can get pure Tamil. So while the language is old, the thought that baffles us is why no written script? While the Egyptian hieroglyphics and Sumerian cuneiform script are all available in written clay tablets from 3200 BCE, why is there no written script? One reason could be that they were written on palm leaves, which deteriorated with time, and I would like to believe that our ancients wrote copious works, and clay tablets would have been too bulky for them to store, and hence they resorted to the palm leaves. And the great Tamil scholar Tepo Meenakshi Sundranar, in his History of Tamil Literature, points out how in the Tamil written tradition, everything from grammar, as in Tolkappiyam, to medicinal textbooks, to astrological textbooks, the ideas were captured in short aphorisms or in sutras, condensed into lesser words so as to accommodate being recorded on these palm leaf scripts. He also goes on to mention how many Tamil palm leaf scripts are available in the monasteries of Tibet, where, thanks to the cold climate, they have been preserved well. Another factor for lack of written records could be the very strong oral tradition that India had. Mnemonics is a technique of recalling, and a highly systematized mnemotechnique ensured the transmission from one generation to the next of not just folklore and cultural and ritual ideologies, but also religious chants and hymns. And in the absence of written notational schemes, even in performing arts. To this day, the Western world looks at awe at Carnatic musicians who are able to create an unceasing flow of patterns of the basic swaras known as Kalpana Swara. And if you take our own Tamil music system, the ancient records, including the works of such great stalwarts like Adiyarku Nallar, enlist so many books of Tamil music that are lost to us, but that provide us with the information that there were a little less than 12,000 different pan or ragas in the Tamil music system, of which only 103 have survived today. So much of data lost because of oral transmission over centuries together. And today, in the field of linguistics, there are many scientific tools that have been developed in order to retrace the roots of languages such as ours, which do not have a strong recorded history. So, we will explore the antiquity of Tamil language and thereby Tamil roots through these tools in our next episode. And here we will conclude with the observation made by Bishop Robert Caldwell in the preface of the second edition to his notable work published in 1875 from England, where he was ailing, the intellectual capacity of a people amongst whom so wonderful an organ of thought has been developed. Let's continue with our search in the next episode. Vanakkam.